So yesterday, a stat came out that 75% of repeat violent offenders are granted bail. 75% of repeat violent offenders are granted bail. Sound insane to you?
Coming through.
Rick Madison, 1 foot off center. Jeff Cox in the house. I want to say, if you want, just hit that little subscribe button. We do appreciate it because this is great. Like we're getting some good feedback. You get feedback about our rants and
All the time.
It's wonderful.
From across the country, which is really cool.
Which is great, yeah.
Luckily, my mom lives in Halifax. Just kidding, she doesn't. But
Yeah, it'd be great if we had relatives across Canada. I want to talk a bit about this lunch I had yesterday with a friend of mine, white collar job, educated individual, and we were just chatting. Politics seems to go into the conversation if I'm part of it. But anyway, I said I said some throwaway comment. And he says, "Oh yeah, well, that Pierre Poly. How do you pronounce his last name?" I said, "Polyev." Yeah, I don't know. He doesn't seem to have a plan. He just keeps attacking the Liberals. And I said, okay, let's dive into that a little bit. I want to understand, again, tell me what you mean by that. And he says, well, it just seems like any clip, he's just attacking the PM, like personally. I said, okay. I said, we built a whole show around it. But anyway... but I wanted to find out where he was coming from, and he dove into it a little bit, and he says, well, it just doesn't seem like they have a proactive plan. And, as I sit there and I go, and again, I got into the list of Trans Mountain pipelines to carbon tax to, I had all the things at the ready, but I said, this is interesting because this is somebody that maybe he's a legacy Liberal voter. And what I mean by that is just around the dinner table, they've always voted Liberal. Yep. And there was some great Liberal PMs. There was, Paul Martin, Jean Chrétien. There was some fundamentally great human beings at the helm. Yep. Now, I think if you don't read the news or you... I'm trying to understand this other side without calling them names. Because we talk a lot about that. Yeah. So I don't know. Is there starting to be a fundamental shift? I don't know.
So I'm with you because I ironically had the same conversation yesterday by pure fluke. Someone I don't see very often. End up spending a couple hours with them, and very similar messaging. So pretty much came out and said, yeah, I donated some money to the Conservatives, but now I'm frustrated. And I said, about what? And he's like, listen, I know Justin Trudeau's an asshat. You don't have to tell me that anymore. And I said, okay, fair. Yeah, we can all agree on that. And he goes, but what I'm tired of hearing from the Conservatives every day in an email is that it's all broken and it's too woke and it's this and it's that, which I agree. I think that was one of the things you and I agreed on when we started doing this. Even prior to the show, when we were doing other shows, we talked about trying to really focus on what needs to happen and not just get in a bashing of the left, which is easy and fun to do. So it's hard to not go there. But listen, I agree. I think it's time for a shift. And again, if you get I think this is probably the struggle from the Conservative standpoint. Stephen Harper has actually publicly said this in the last 6 months, is it's not the time for Pierre to come out and actually outlay what he would do as a prime minister. His job is to hold the government that's in power accountable. And I find that interesting because I think, as you're bringing up and I'm hearing as well, is people want to know a plan. And again, I think there are some fundamental areas where they could just really, really pave the way for themselves quite easily. They'll never do this, but this would be my first one. Just come out and say that you guys support pro-choice. Like that puts that to bed with whatever that bizarre acting scenario was with Trudeau a week or two ago, where they tried to make a mountain into a molehill with the conspiracy that the kid was placed to actually do it, and who knows. But come out and take a stance on that. I think Pierre's done it in the past. Do it again. Listen, this is not up for debate in our party. We know where Canada stands on it. We're pro-choice. Okay. So,
you should explain that scene, by the way. You should explain what happened there.
Yeah, but if you didn't see it, essentially in the most bizarre, had to be staged scenario, some kid pretty much walks up to Justin Trudeau and says, like, how can you not be pro-life, and make some arguably bigoted statement, and then Trudeau gets to respond, which was super canned, and then tried to post it all over social media for the next 3 days, and pretty much got called out that wait a second, how did that? So again, that I think there's one that you can put to bed, because it's the constant of the extreme left, right? So let's all make a decision that that's where we're at. Whether you're alienating your far right base or not, I think you have to make that call if you're going to win an election. From there, I think there are multiple things they can do. Get a climate plan in place that is first of all, I would be calling liberals out saying, listen, nice 20% tax that you've applied to all of us, and it's not working. So let's start with that. So we make a statement to say, hey, so taxing the middle and lower class into poverty is not the way to solve the climate issues, especially when China is turning on coal left, right, and center right now. So actually outlay your carbon plan. So what are you doing to reduce emissions? What are you going to support to reduce them? Just don't say the blanketed statement that this isn't working. I know it's not working. I can read. What are you going to do? I think you can have a high level. I think these are core issues that are going to be the challenge for that center left leaner to tick the box of the right.
And I think that's the key. Is we're talking about that 1.7% or 2%, let's say, of the world's emissions we are responsible for. Now, again, am I saying, listen, at 2%, we're not even an afterthought. We still have to look after our own backyard, our own house, which means fundamentally looking after emissions. And I get all that. That is paramount, of course. But we share the same air as the rest of the world. So for me to get on board with any kind of plan, I need to know, as somebody that is interested, how are we going to earmark funds? How are we going to utilize these funds? And how are we going to help the rest of the world become cleaner? Because LNG is sitting in Canada. We're happy to share it. Well, no, we're not. But say we were.
You and I might be.
But just because we're after jobs and prosperity and all that kind of stuff. But anyway, I do think that, if they laid out that plan and said, listen, here's how we're going to help the rest of the world and benefit Canadians, and then we're also going to look after our own house. I think that's what a left-leaning person would like to hear, is they are concerned. Is climate change? Yes. Oh, we're going to look after that. We're going to address that.
So and again, I think you're right. So I think I believe the voting group of Canadians is reasonable and will listen. And I really believe if you came out and said, hey, listen, here's the deal. We're 1.75% of global emissions. We can reduce our global emissions in this country by half, and it's a drop in the ocean. Or we can have a plan to work with developing countries. So imagine if Pierre came out and said, hey, listen, here's my plan. China, maybe not in the best state to have this conversation right now, but India as an example. So here's what we can do. We can take and I don't know the number, called 18% of emissions in the world that are produced by India, and we can reduce them by half by providing them in the next 10 years liquefied natural gas, which will then allow us to buy us time to work on an actual zero plan that's 20 to 25 years out, and we are actually going to work to help reduce global emissions. Imagine that's the plan is, listen, as a leader of this country, I can also be a leader on the world stage to actually convince developing countries how to reduce emissions by helping them with our own natural resources. I believe Canadians will listen to that. I think that's where he has to go.
Especially if you can back it up with some sort of metrics or data, because I mean, that whole 1.5, 1.7, 2% of Canada responsible for emissions, and then to say, and listen, if we shared our LNG with India, to use your example, we would fundamentally be helping 7%. So in other words, we're actually helping on a wider scale, greater scale. But if there was some way to extrapolate the data so that, a viewer in Canada goes, I get that. Okay, so you're actually thinking about the world's air versus the emissions for Canada.
And the other piece of it too is, listen, I think we need to start having honest conversations about what kind of emissions are actually produced when you look at things like electric vehicles. Because the reality is they're net zero after they hit the road, but there's a significant build and cost in the emissions category leading up to a vehicle hitting the road. Not to mention we're having some pretty serious reports about child mining right now to produce a lot of the minerals that are needed for these batteries. I mean, and again, no matter what, it's going to get spun as just right-wing bigotry extremism. But I believe if you put the stats in front of them, not tied to the Liberals, just said, hey, listen, my fellow human beings.
Yes.
This is where we get if we produce an electric car versus a gas vehicle. Here is a better, simpler solution where we've got to stop. I mean, that's the problem with the Green Zealots, right? They have Jerry Butts is a fascist. He's an extremist. He's not speaking truth. So I think as the leader of the Conservatives, you come out in middle ground and say, hey, listen, this is the reality of producing some of the electric energy that we're looking at, or renewable resources. Here's where we're at from a traditional fuel perspective. This is our plan to actually help the planet become better. I believe people would open their ears.
Do you think, though, that we should hire a radical environmentalist to be our who's
the criminal Stephen? He looks so good in an orange jumpsuit.
Well, but that's the picture I always see is him in an orange jumpsuit, which, I think if you're going to
I love when they put him in the orange jumpsuit beside Justin in blackface. Like that whenever I'm in the vaults of Twitter on true, the extremely right-leaning news media, they always have these awesome Stephen in a jumpsuit, Trudeau in blackface, right?
Do you think, though, that they've somewhat muffled some of the outcries because I mean, he does think in a radical, positioning way about most things, and every now and then I hear about a tweet or anything that comes out of that office, and I think he's not of right mind. Like he's so passionate, which is great. And again, I'm never going to call, but I think fundamentally you need a proactive plan, a process-driven plan that actually has some, instead of just yelling, some sort of productive move forward plan of how we're going to correct climate change.
Listen, I can live with the passion. And I'll give you an example. And again, I know people get all over, and I just don't have the time or effort or want to. But Greta rode a sailboat across the Atlantic to speak in New York, and I go, well, you know what? Good on you. You know what I mean? I at least you did it right. And there's a lot of people that love to get in and needle her, and fine. I get it. My problem with Stephen is the same problem I have with David Suzuki is. He's out there talking about the extremism of this country and what we have to do, and he logs more hours in a month in a Yukon, a fossil fuel extended cab Yukon with a driver than most families log in a year. And that's the part that I really get frustrated with, is the hypocrisy. And it's the hypocrisy of Stephen, it's the hypocrisy of the PMO that really frustrate me. And it's no different than David Suzuki. I mean, here's a guy that is promoting essentially environmental terrorism, and has a carbon footprint larger than 10 families. I mean, his homes in Vancouver, let alone around Asia Pacific, are hundreds of thousands of square feet combined.
So a friend of mine rents one of his homes in Point Grey, and it is 4,800 square feet. So it's not a lean-to, it doesn't have solar panels everywhere, and it uses some outdated fueling systems. Right. Now, if you're, but does it pull in a wicked high rent? Absolutely it does. Beautiful spot, gorgeous area. So again, I some of these people that are environmentalists, again, I'm not going to paint a brush, but
I want to. This is where what is the messaging that needs to come out? Because that's where we start on this. Is like, listen, I think it's time to move away. Like, here's the thing. I enjoy Pierre. I mean, there's nothing more exciting at 8:00 at night when my head hits the pillow and I get to go through who Pierre ripped in the legislature today, because it's hilarious. I mean, the guy's the class clown to a certain degree, right? Like, you're just waiting for him to stand up and you're like, okay, this is going to be amazing.
When he does the button.
Totally. When he does the button, I'm just like, this is going to be great. All that being said, he's got to start. It's obviously, based on what we're hearing, he's got to have a bit of a shift. And I'm hesitant because I'm going to alienate some of our listeners right off the bat, but I really think he's got to go inside and find his inner Obama and start talking about hope and start talking about what he wants this to be. And he is, his bring it home message, which I find quite funny, is good, but it's got to go farther. It's time to start talking about what we can accomplish as a country.
But and we talk. His narrative has been freedom. Obviously that's his big thing. The part that I enjoy, but again, I think we have to maybe less so, is the wry grin he gets on his face when he stands up, because you have what I would call the best prime minister, if you're in the opposition, ever created in front of you. Yeah. Kevin O'Leary's clip about he is the worst PM. He is the worst. Did you catch that? He's the worst CEO. No disrespect, the worst. And I don't have a lot of time for Kevin O'Leary, but I did enjoy that clip. But I think the wry grin, and I think when I go back to that lunch I had with a friend of mine, the other part is he says, well, there doesn't really seem to be a plan. But if I'm not mistaken, even in the short clips I get, he does say when our government takes that office, we will strike down this bill, because we want Canadians to have freedom. We know the bill we're talking about. When the Poilievre government has majority, we would do, and he starts talking about these talk points of no longer World Economic Forum. He talked about the fact that I will have a registry, and you cannot have any of my ministers in government part of the World Economic Forum. Like, he speaks out loud of things that he will fundamentally do when he takes power. Now, that to me is a soft plan. Like, that is some things. You do this, we will do this.
But I think but again, I'm with you, except the struggle is the minute you mention WEF, you put yourself in the conspiracy camp. And again, do I think there's some weird shit going on there? Sure I do. It's bizarre. Like, but again, it's also pretty fringe. Like, now you're into the Bill Gates pedophilia talk. And I'm like, I mean where there's smoke, there's fire sometimes. But again, I rarely go down those rabbit holes, if anything, just to prove some sanity and bring it back to normal. My concern is when you start saying you're going to ban people from the World Economic Forum, you're alienating a larger group of people than you're gaining, and
who have to Google it,
right? And the answer is, I think, is it just obviously that I don't think there's any reason, not because I think they have some. Although I'm sure they do have some nuts extreme policies, I think the reality is we just don't need them. But it's for no other reason than what are they? You want to talk about the Laurentian elites in Canada. This is it at a world stage. So I wouldn't be doing it because of the conspiracy theories of WEF. I would be doing it because what do we need to go to Davos for to spend trillions of dollars over 10 years talking about what we're going to turn the world into? And it's just a load of crap.
Bond movies are made about that stuff. That's for sure. So going forward, I just want to take a breather because, like I said, I mean, we built a whole show around what goes on in Ottawa, but I want to bring it closer to home.
Yep.
NDP and our good friend Adrian Dix have brought about so virtual healthcare is a thing. I saw my doctor, luckily enough, and it's funny, I haven't seen a doctor in a long time, and I said to the receptionist, she goes, you haven't been here in a while, Mr. Madison. I said, no, but I have to get some checkup. We got to check the poop's all good and all that stuff. And she goes, oh, well, are you our patient? And I actually had to do a little bit of selling going, well, my doctor retired, and then I think she took okay. So I was on the bubble for a second. Yeah. and there's a little bit of panic in my eyes going, okay. And I had to, there's been different friends that go, do you know someone that I can get for a doctor? Because I'm worried about my kid. I'm worried about, there is a fundamental shortage. And I did ask to my doctor, luckily, are you paid differently than in Ontario? And she goes, that's starting to be fixed. Yep. They're starting to address caseload, who you get paid for, what you get paid on. And she goes, it's way better, but she goes, we're not there yet, and that's why a lot of doctors have left the province. Yeah. So talk a bit about this shift and what Mr. Dix, Adrian Dix, has done lately to BC people.
Yeah, so a little bit of backstory. So I work in supplemental healthcare. I sell private healthcare in Canada. Full disclosure.
Whoa.
I know.
That's you?
Yeah.
Okay.
And the reality is it's throughout our system for multiple reasons. And I want to be super clear. I actually believe in a publicly funded healthcare model. I don't believe that Canadians should be declined healthcare because they can't afford it. I'm very sincere about that. That doesn't mean the model that we have today is correct. I think there are hybrid models that would work, and you can look to 30 countries around the world that are doing it better than we are, that have universal health care. Got to set that aside because we're talking about one specific area. So what's happened in the past 2 years, but I'm going to say 5 years, is essentially virtual healthcare, which is telemedicine. So seeing a doctor through a webcam has especially through the pandemic become extremely accelerated. And the way it came about was actually through the privatization, which again is just more proof that government shouldn't be doing it. Go let private companies really innovate a space and just be there to support, okay? So a company called Babylon, which is ultimately bought by TELUS, is kind of at the front of this story, although there's many across the country. I mean, there are countless virtual healthcare providers now in Canada. I know a number of families that use their virtual healthcare as their primary doctor. My best friend in Calgary uses what is now Maple, but was Wello, as their virtual primary doctor because they can't get one. So what happened is that's funded two ways. You can it's a fee for service, so it's $50 a visit, or what you're seeing is it's getting picked up by employers and they're putting it into employee benefit packages. So you get a virtual healthcare package as part of your employee benefits. $7 a month per employee. Yeah, this is it. Everybody pays in. If you take out, that's how insurance works. What the NDP have said as of yesterday is no more. Adrian Dix said this is the worst kind of privatized medicine. Okay, I'm with you, fair. But instead of saying you can go and, because this is the answer. It's the answer for the privatization of our healthcare system would be this: let it continue, let it innovate like it's doing, but pick the costs up. So you get to say to a BC resident, oh, you're struggling to find a doctor, but you're using TELUS or you're using Maple. Here's what we're going to do. You get to submit your receipt for your doctor's visit. It'll be paid for by the province. That's not the answer Adrian Dick said yesterday. Adrian Dick said, no longer are we letting people pay for healthcare. And they said, okay, wait a second, that's my family doctor and I can't get a doctor. And he said...
So the biggest issue is there's no viable alternative because people... So when you say no more of this...
But with no solution.
With no alternative solution.
Correct.
So fundamentally, I'm without an option now because my government says, no.
You can't pay for it.
Yeah, you will no longer have access to this.
Yep.
I don't want you to have access to this. And then, I'm sorry, Mr. Dix, but where does that leave us and our family? Give me a minute.
Out in the cold.
Yeah, and that to me is when you start, there's a base instinct that we all have. Safety, health, like health is paramount. If you can't give me an option for how I'm going to tend to that, I'm now all of a sudden going, wait a second, does this government fundamentally think about me and my family? Not with that kind of action.
Right.
So now all of a sudden I'm starting to, and again, we talked about this off the top, I'm a legacy voter. I grew up in a family, we all voted NDP. Listen, my grandfather's grandfather was part of a union environment, and that's what we do. They look after us, we look after the brotherhood. Bam! Now all of a sudden you're playing with my family's health. Now all of a sudden that box starts to just look a little bit more translucent because I'm going, I don't know if I can do this anymore.
But you people have to understand they're doing it everywhere. So here's the other challenge is like they've moved the NDP, but again, arguably this has been a Canadian model as of late, and I will connect the dots for you, is single source drugs. So what provinces have been doing, and as an example is what British Columbia is doing is they are choosing one provider of a drug. It's how they essentially create their pharmacare program. And they say, if you have rheumatoid arthritis, this is going to be the drug you're going to use. We're only going to have one. The question would be, okay, why do we do that? Well, they're doing it so that they can grind the price down. You go, okay, well, that makes sense. The problem is when you have one supplier and you piss that supplier off and that supplier says, oh, no, we're not going to do that. Then what happens? We end up in drug shortages. It's happened to us multiple times. There's an argument to say that the reason that we had shortages of even over-the-counter drugs in Canada, which we did for the past 2 years, I think you and I both had taken had been away to places like Mexico, which is not a first world country, and had no problems finding any drug we wanted, including children's Tylenol, all over the shelves. And yet at home, it was like winning the lottery if you have young children, which I do, and you would walk in and be like, does that say 0 to 24 months? And it was like you were literally trying to tuck it under your coat till you got to the checkout line. These are all factors that Canadians need to understand are driving this deliverables or lack of deliverables in our healthcare. So again, to come out yesterday and say virtual healthcare goes against our socialized system, but the majority of Canadians have actually picked it up because they have no other choice. But you can't do that anymore without a solution. To me, it's insane. Why would you do that? Who's going to die? I mean, I don't want to sound extreme, but.
Oh no, we do that on the show.
That's blood on your hands in my mind.
It is.
Because it would be impossible to connect those dots. But somebody's going to get misdiagnosed or not diagnosed because of that decision yesterday, and I firmly believe that.
So speaking of blood on the hands, because I started thinking about this the other day when I have a friend who's in the RCMP, who's literally looking at a career change because he said, it gets talked about. There's a lot of blame placed on us for the fact that we're not, crime is on the rise. People don't feel safe. But he said it's literally the fact that you pick somebody up, you do the documentation, you do everything right. You pick up somebody, you place them, like you literally put them into jail.
Yep.
And then they get, a very expedited processing. And then all of a sudden, the next day you're driving in your cruiser and you see that same person walking around on the street. He says, you are so deflated because you've done everything right. The way, and he says, I was brought up like this is law, this is order. There's a semblance of common sense here. And I don't know where that is right now, and I'm getting frustrated, and I know it's hurting me as a person, it's hurting me as a police officer, and this is part in function to this catch and release that has become part of the Canadian legacy of no, if you are an identifiable group, vulnerable group, you are to be pushed back out onto the street. And I think there was a number of blood on the hands. There's been a number of deaths, like of murders of those same offenders. And again, I go back to this officer's going, I don't know how long I can do this and feel good about myself.
So I think the stat was just in British Columbia, which is where you and I are, but it may, I would assume you can put it across Canada. So yesterday, a stat came out that 75% of repeat violent offenders are granted bail. 75% of repeat violent offenders are granted bail. Sound insane to you? So right there, understand. And listen, I'm a big proponent of this. I grew up in a generation that was told to respect the police and that the RCMP were considered some of the best in the world. And I find it extremely frustrating, and the voice has dampened greatly. But defund the police was probably one of the scariest movements. Woke,
hello,
left,
Portland.
crap. Yeah, how you doing? Right?
How's it going? And Chicago.
Seattle
Chicago too,
dude. Seattle. Yeah. Like, and again, I don't want to dismiss, but again, this is the problem. There are fundamental challenges with the U.S. and it gets bled into Canada, right or wrong, and I think that's where we have to stop. Now, does the RCMP have challenges? Yeah, you bet. Is it Brenda Luckie that ran the RCMP that was in Trudeau's back pocket? Mm-hmm. Remember, she was involved in the that's right when they tried to promote the gun ban, right as that was going down on the East Coast. I mean, you want to know why they look tainted? It's again, got to tie it back to Liberals every time, but those are frustrations that again that we've got to deal with. And listen, are there I'm sure challenges within the RCMP and municipal police forces of Canada? Yeah, sure. I have challenges in my organization. Do you have challenges in yours? Like, Plenty. It's going to happen, mm-hmm. right? So we're going to do the best we can do. I don't believe that the defund the police model should have ever been spoken in Canada. I'm sure they find it extremely frustrating to not be able to do their job. And I think this is a shift that needs to happen. Like, I'm going to sound like an old man, but like, people sincerely need to get back to a stage where you walk by a police officer and say, hey, thanks for your service. Mm-hmm. Right? And we've got to get back to those days, because those days existed. And I think they're starting to grassroots do a better job at that. At least that's what I'm noticing. I'm with them. I have a buddy that was part of a municipal police force. He had a long, not a long time period in a career, but he had a long go that was probably only 8 years in the force. And the stuff I watched him go through and the way he was treated and the way he was treated during his exit was disgusting. It was honestly disgusting. We need to do a better job. Now, everybody in the media today seems to go, how did we get here? Well, I can tell you. 2018, the Liberals passed a bill called a change to our criminal code, Bill C-25. That's what led to this disaster. So the next time that somebody, if somebody that's that works for Global or CBC is listening to this, I'll tell you how. Go back to 2018 and read Bill C-25 and the change to our criminal code instead of what's going on. How is this Pierre's fault? Being facetious, but you know what I mean. The reality is you can track this to a change in our criminal code. That's our problem.
Well, I think when you go back, and again, I don't want to sound aged either, but the gray hair often shows that. But Stephen Harper was being tough on crime. Like if you remember, in his last couple of years in office, he was cracking down and making it, and again, I'll give a bit of a free pass for the prison system, but this is 2018 versus 2020 when, the prisons were basically deemed unsafe due to COVID, and they actually had to say, okay, well, if you're on the periphery here, we'll push you out because we need capacity for the jails, we need distancing and everything else. But I do think when I think about the Stephen Harper days, we just. And I don't want to idolize the guy, but a lot of people are going, remember those days? And it seems to me that he had a better feel for Canadians and what we're after. We're after protection. We're after safety. Like those are core, let's call them competencies for a PM, is to look after those things. And when people are starting to feel unsafe in their streets and they're starting to feel like, is anybody looking after us? Is there any accountability? And when they start to feel a little bit lost, I think that's when, again, you see a fundamental shift. Now, how could the opposition, take advantage of this? I think they are. I think they're starting to go, there's a baseline instinct that we're not looking after for Canadians. And right now, it is completely up in the air. Of a lot of cities, a lot of towns across Canada are facing homelessness, opioid addiction, crime, like an increase in crime that we haven't seen. And over the last 8 years, is it getting better? No. In fact, it's getting worse. So now all of a sudden, you've got a very big, you've got a great big talking point that he cannot stop talking about, which he shouldn't, and holding Trudeau's feet to the fire on, when is this going to change? When are you going to start realizing that people, when they feel unsafe, they're going to vote you and your ass out? And it doesn't seem to, but then he'll talk about, listen, what does he do with his fingers or something? He does something with his fingers all the time. and every time he does, I just want to snap him.
So you brought up a couple of things that I want to, because I think this is something that the Conservatives should be paying attention to, is what was Stephen Harper's downfall. And to me, cliche, the stats aren't bang on, but it's pretty close, is, listen, do you know the difference of people who believe or practice or publicly state a religious following in the U.S. versus Canada? It's an 80-20 rule. So 80% of Americans actually would tell you, I'm a Christian, I'm a Jew, I'm a Muslim. Only 20% of Canadians will do that. Stephen Harper's downfall, I believe, was that he could not separate his personal views from the state. So he couldn't leave church and state alone, among a few other things that, again, I think the left blew out of proportion about denying science. Because if you want to talk about denying science, I could really talk about the Liberals in the past 7 years, but so that one is subjective. But to me, that was it. And I think, and again, it comes back to some of these things like the and how this whole conversation started today. Like, if the Conservatives need to pay attention to what are the core values of Canadians, you just mentioned a whole bunch of them, and what I'm saying is the other piece of it they have to realize is that as soon as you go down these not center but right thought patterns, you'll lose a bunch of people, which is really where we started this conversation today, right? And I'm with you. I now, but I mean, the funnier part is, listen, George Bush Jr. was an absolute disaster. Like, you couldn't have thought the world, like listen, I remember thinking, like,
You mean Yosemite Sam? Pow, pow, pow.
Oh, my God.
I'll tell you something about something.
Down Texas. But the thing is this, like, then Donald Trump got in and it was like, remember how good George W. Bush, like, do you remember that? It was like, you know who I miss? George W. Bush. And it was like, what am I saying? Right? Like, so you know, it's easy to idolize the guy when you're 7 or 8 years out and you've just you know gone through the things that we've gone through. But I am with you, right? I think there are some core fundamentals that Canadians are after that are totally being ignored right now.
Let's you know, we're having a lot of fun, but I want to talk about the one subject which is probably going to get a little bit more press, maybe from the CBC. Now they've been labeled as such through Twitter. But anyway, one of the things is he's Mr. Trudeau is starting to backtrack a little bit about during the COVID days, and
a little bit,
yeah, like he's saying, you know, I tried to incentivize.
I gave people choice.
Yeah, I was pretty good about that. I thought, you know, it seems like, and again, is it sport? Yes, it is. But I find it interesting because this raises a whole bunch of old emotions, and if you remember that time, and I do clearly, very, very divisive time of you know, you're unvaxxed, you're vaxxed, and you can't get on an airplane, you can't go in a restaurant, you can't do a lot of things. And I know people never took the vaccine. You and I both did. Mm-hmm. And I remember thinking, wow, how every day you are faced with this reality of you can't do certain things. There are certain freedoms that are no longer yours. And you were ostracized by more than one person. Like through a lot of people, there's family members that are still split. Yep. There's still friends that don't speak to each other. Like there's still that fundamental divide. And now he's trying to say, no, it wasn't like that at all. Like that, it was unicorn dust and sparkle everywhere. Yeah.
Couple things that you touched on, and again, I think this is the part where no one wants to have a common sense conversation about it, and yet I believe most Canadians fall in this camp. To your point, you and I made decisions to get vaccinated. It is what it is. That was my choice. You can't have. I've always said this. You can't apply my body, my choice where it pleases, which is what the Liberals do, right? They you know, Chrystia Freeland, anytime somebody talks about abortion, is the first to get on every national news and say, rah, 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 which, again, I'm with you. I believe Canadians should have that my body, my choice mentality. But you had a prime minister who I hope I never live through a time as divisive as that was for us. Fueled by comments that, like, people that aren't making that decision are racist and misogynistic, among many other things. You're right. They were, you know, as a business owner, it was impossible. You know, we tried, again, it's not my call. And this is my, you know, I believe conservative views or you know, so we still libertarian views, but you got to live your life, man. I mean, if you're not doing harm to other people, and I guess that's the question. But again, I've never, you know, vaccinations are by definition to protect yourself, right? But there was this spin which was not true, and this is the part that really, I think, for a lot of us got frustrating, is that you were doing harm to others. Now, when it all came out, the irony is we all got vaccinated and all got COVID, and then it was like, well, your symptoms weren't as bad. Well, bullshit. So the part of this now where he's trying to back away is not just in Canada. Joe Biden's doing it too, trying to say it was actually the Trump. It was under the Trump regime that all this stuff was put into place. Anthony Fauci is the other person these days that is trying to clean up his image by saying, I never. I mean, he was the direct influence of most of these things. So you're starting to see these governments back away from what were very extreme divisive views. And this week it was Mr. Trudeau who I mean, it was you wanted to throw up watching it. It was like, what is this? And again, if I go back to those times, it was so hard for all of us to make decisions of, what do I do? I don't believe it's my place to tell people what they can do with their body. One of the most interesting things I did through that period of time is started to talk to people that had publicly told me that they weren't getting vaccinated, because I actually wanted to know, are you just wearing it? Are you what we're calling the tin hat, or what's the backup? And what I found in almost every situation is there was a very viable story that led me to get there. So I'm just gonna very quickly tell you what they were. The ones that stick out to me. And again, I had this conversation over, and I said, listen, I'm not here to judge you. I sincerely want to know how you got here. One top of mind. Mom was given a blood transfusion in the late 1980s and ended up with Hep C. Had an absolute disaster of a life because of it. And this guy said to me, you can't tell me they know the answers to these things. That's what they told my mom. And I went, okay, valid. Went on the next one. Had a very bad experience in his teen years. I think it was almost a sexual assault with a doctor, and he just had absolutely no faith in our system. How am I supposed to tell that guy? Oh yeah, no, you need to believe. And this list went on. Again, another one very similar to the first story was very sad story where dad had a blood transfusion, got HIV, spread it to his mom. Both parents died of AIDS. Like this was in fact, no one that I spoke to was like, oh, Pfizer's trying to microchip us and they're going to track us. That was actually never the story. The story was a very heartfelt, emotional, this is what my family or I have been through in the past, and I just am not comfortable. Like, what are you supposed to do? I'm sitting there going, man, that's valid, right? So, but we're not having these realistic conversations, right? Because we had a government dictating to us that people that weren't making decisions to get vaccinated were morons.
Yeah, and I was watching a clip, and it was a California feed, and it was all about how you still need to get vaxxed. Like, they're still pushing that agenda very hard in California, and I had to laugh because I have a bit of a marketing background, and they were saying it'll be fun, like it'll be great, like you get like, and I was sitting there going, I put my head in my hands going, is this what it's come to? And there's still this massive agenda. Now, again, pharmaceutical companies, if I have some dabblings in the stock market, and some analysts say, listen, get out of pharmaceuticals right now, because there's a hammer coming, which is governments are going to say, no, you can actually start paying for this because you are part of this narrative, and you are actually going to help pay for some of this mess you've created. So who knows? I mean, again, that's all conjecture and everything else, but I still think where we're at now and having this wonderful perspective, which we're blessed with, I still think way back in the day when I chose, but did I really choose to get vaccinated, or was it like either you get vaxxed or you were a super spreader? There's a bunch of names for people that didn't want to get vaxxed. Oh, you're a tin hat wearing, there's all this other stuff that was going around, and you felt bad. What if you kill your aunt? What if you kill your grandfather? What if you can kill people if you don't get vaccinated? Holy crap! Well, I don't want to kill anybody.
It was pretty extreme.
It was.
And I listen. Listen, I got sober when I was 26. You got to be an animal to get sober at 26. I'm sorry, I can fully admit to that. The stuff I did to my body before I was sober, I wasn't overly concerned about a vaccination. But you're right. I mean, the reality is I felt so pent up that it was like, if I got a vaccination, I got to travel. I was like, I would have stabbed glass in my eye at that point. So I was like jabbing, when do I get the next one? Was it forced? Maybe. I guess, like I said, I mean, again, I hope there are no long-term effects to it. I will say, listen, when I got my second one, I did have some health concerns that I believe were directly related to it. But I'm not. That's not my messaging today. But you're right. There was a force to it. I mean, and this is the problem: is we can't you and I can sit here and have this conversation, and some people are yeah, and some people are like, listen to these two crazies. But again, if you look, I despise Dr. Bonnie Henry. I really do. I'm sure she's a nice woman. She ruined multiple lives in this province on the back of COVID. And I don't believe for a second, you and I talked about this through other shows we did through that time period. Listen, her face was on barbecue sauce. She had a shoe deal. She had a shoe deal. Okay. And again, these are arguable. This is statistics that exist. If you look, she would put restrictions on ridings that were not pro her government. She would not put restrictions on ridings that were pro her government. She drew lines in the sand on where businesses could be open based on businesses she owned. That is factual by a kilometer.
That was the part that for me, like when you start thinking about, okay, you have a winery. How many times were wineries stifled, shortened hours, what have you? So 2 particular examples that come to mind. I talked to a gym owner. She had she had 3 locations, and she said, okay, the shutdown, we totally get it. We don't know what we're dealing with. And then she said each successive shutdown, the government says, well, you can go back up to 50%, 80%. Well, your numbers, your expenditures, everything is dealing with 100% back to full operating capacity. When you can't hit that, you already start hemorrhaging money. Now all of a sudden you shut down 2, 3 times, and your membership is saying you have to be open. My health is at risk, and they're hammering the business owners. And the business owners are going, listen, I'm down to my last penny here in the bank, and I can't get any more money from the bank. Mm-hmm. And they're going through all this stuff, and then she stands up and says, okay, we've realized that gyms are actually super spreaders, so now we're going to shut down gyms. That was when the big public outcry was. I just had a fundamental problem, like when John Horgan sat at the podium and said, cruise ships no longer welcome here, and he had a smile on his face.
Yeah. It's like they took pride
in small business and medium sized. Like, listen, we're gonna keep Walmart's open. Yeah. We're gonna keep Costco's open. And no offense, but those are big box stores that have massive amounts of cash to handle any kind of shutdowns. Never shut down, and small businesses had to weave and pivot and everything else. And I still think it might have been the darkest time for a lot of business owners, and still continues to, where they're still paying off this debt.
And the debts haven't been called yet. I mean, those debts are being called at the end of this year. I don't think that landslide is done. I'm not even sure that it started, and that's probably the scariest part. And again, this is the challenge when you let a dictator, and for 3 years, Bonnie Henry dictated what happened in the province that we live in. She ruined lives. And she,
a non-elected official, by the way.
Yep. And that's the part that scares me, man, about all that stuff that went down. And again, like you said, we're having a realistic conversation about, listen, you and I made decisions to get vaccinated, and again, these are comments that we're not denying the situation. It was severe. I mean, I remember thinking, man, this is serious. I had a young child in that time. I mean, we had genuine, like, again, you're told these things, you're sitting in front of doctors. And that is the best example as a parent. We spent a lot of time discussing, okay, what are we going to do to keep our children safe? This was not this is a pandemic. I'm talking, we recognized it was a pandemic. We recognized that it was very serious, but what we're saying is it was handled extremely wrong, and we recognized that in the moment too, right? We were on a different show at the time, but I mean, we were constantly screaming at the top of our lungs, you're destroying people's lives.
Well, I think one of the symptoms that comes out of getting vaccinated is makes you way more opinionated. That's for sure. Thank you again, Jeff Cox. And this is 1 Foot Off Center. Again, if you like it, subscribe. If you don't like it, subscribe, because you never know what these guys will talk about. And then share it with friends and family. We would love that.
Thanks, Rick. Good to see you.
Coming through.